Greetings, dear friends. I present to your attention the most common malfunctions and breakdowns that occur on the Volvo XC90. There are almost no serious problems with internal wiring, only the drainage of the hedge can spoil the nerves, and clogged drainage of the engine shield can cause fatal failures of the control units. Even the multiplex wiring with a CAN bus made by Volvo doesn't give a hassle, doesn't drain the battery, and doesn't finish off with glitches of various blocks. Here the four-wheel drive clutch control unit dies here with unviable regularity. He suffers from the seal of the incoming wiring. It is strongly recommended to remove it and coat it with a sealant every few years. Do not rely on the cracking compound and gum. The flooding problems of the passenger compartment control units and the CEM module are somewhat exaggerated. They fail due to corrosion, but it is not necessarily related to the flooding of the block due to drainage. Malfunctions are common on machines with perfectly clean drain holes, which spend most of their lives in dry climates. It's just that if it is wet in the inner cavity and the tightness of the block is broken, then this will be enough. The relatively short life of brake discs is the feature of all heavy machines, and the discs fail not because of wear but because of heat, the high temperature of the brake system effects. Otherwise, everything is done with high quality for centuries. The tubes are more reliable than those of Mercedes, as in the ABS unit. The calipers also have a good safety margin. In a suspension, the most troublesome element are the hubs, both front and rear. On a heavy car, they regularly fail. They are very afraid of small ride impacts, and on cars of the early years of production, they often turn out to be not right tight and began to bust due to corrosion. Now there are non-original hubs on sale that are superior in quality to the original. Experienced car owners more often use them. Another characteristic feature of the suspension is the high load on the bell joint in the front suspension, but it changes separately and is inexpensive. You just need to make it a rule to change it without waiting for a serious backlash. Small resource of steering rods and tips is inherited in cars leaving the asphalt, and they also develop a knock on the steering rack early. However, the knock usually doesn't progress, there is almost no backlash, and the rail is not prone to leaks, and replacing the rods will not hit the budget. A small resource of the power steering pump is typical for Volvo cars for this period. It is recommended to keep the oil level in the normal range and monitor the condition of the power steering radiator. It is located here in a very unfortunate place. In general, the suspension resource is more than decent, except that with inline sixes, and when installing low-profile rubber, the suspension will begin to get the owner. The hubs will fail not after 80,000 km but after 30. The resource of the rear silent block in the front suspension will decrease to 40–50,000, and in the rear suspension most of the elements will not reach hundreds. Under normal operation conditions and with the right choice of components, the suspension lives for a long time, at least up to 150,000 approximately. At this mileage, you need to change the shock absorbers. Previously, only the rear silent block of the A-arm in the front, ball joints and stabilizer struts were rented. They can be replaced with a mileage of about half that. If the rear suspension of the car has advanced pneumatic struts, then most likely it will be easier to replace them with a set of conventional springs and shock absorbers, since the cost of these struts is too high. In addition, practice shows that this doesn't affect controllability at all. Manual transmissions are problem-free here, but they are extremely rare. But in general, the transmission on a heavy machine is overloaded, and this affects its resource. Difficulties arise even with the current shaft and drives. The shaft is too pressed here by the exhaust system, and its hinges fail much more often than that of passenger cars. The CV joints of wheel drives are damaged mainly when driving off-road. Still, this is a crossover, not a serious Jeep. Weak protection and low ground clearance make driving on the track very expensive. The Holdex clutch in the rear-wheel drive was also weak, but it doesn't break down very often. If you change the oil on time, then its hydraulic system normally lives up to a mileage of 200,000 km or more. Oddly enough, the automatic transmission angular gearbox fails. It worked perfectly with 2 generations of Volvo cars but lost ground on a heavy crossover. He can cut the splines in the drive, or he can turn the bearings, which entails either replacing the housing or serious locksmith work to restore its geometry. It is not worth demonizing them, although the resource on a heavy CUV is clearly insufficient. With a regular oil change at least once every 60,000 km, they can travel to 100,000. If more often, and even in time to repair the weak linings for blocking the gas turbine engine, then even more. However, usually the owners do not bother with oil changes, additional cooling or replacement of the donut. The box is simply brought to overhaul with a mileage of 120–160,000. Then it is more or less successfully repaired, and so it goes until the next global breakdown. Fortunately, they have been mastered in repair and there are enough spare parts. Belt body solenoids on the IC55-51 are, besides, they can be repaired. For severe cases, there are well body assemblies on sale. If your box is alive, then it is strongly recommended to install a large external automatic transmission radiator and control its operation, and an oil change every 30,000 partial or every 50 complete, or more often if you lack to anneal. The resource of the gas turbine engine linings here, I repeat, is very small, and if ice and boxes are still able to save the owner from worries for several years, then GM doesn't allow this. The vane pump often fails literally out of the blue. A little ATP contamination and overheating are enough. The chains are stretched, the well body is clogged. There is also good news. There are reinforced chains, clutches, gas turbine engines, and radiators for this box on sale. You just need to search a little. Instead of next repair as it was, make a light tuning of the automatic transmission, but the vast majority of owners are not inclined to creativity and simply invest again. Scolding about the engine and the automatic transmission. Quite successful 2.5T and 2.9T were put on the car from the very beginning. The 2.5 version with the MHI TD04 turbine is slightly more reliable than the version with the triple key turbine. The only requires regular replacement of the timing, adjusting the valve clearances in time, and monitoring the crankcase ventilation system. Otherwise, this is a very good unit which has every chance to go several 100,000 kilometers before the first major repair. Again, the resource of the individual ignition coils is not enough, but this is not a very serious problem. The resource of the throttle valve module on cars of the first years of production was also small, but the Italian Magneti Morelli module was not installed here, so it can be safely replaced with a later version. For the rest, it is worth keeping an eye on the numerous sensors. The intake system of the 2.9T engine is noticeably more complicated, and there are two turbines, which increases the cost of repairs and the likelihood of problems, and also increases the load on the cooling system. But by and large, this engine has a good resource, although it will shake out much more money from the owner than 2.5, and not only for gasoline. Much more interesting is the naturally aspired inline 6 3.2, which is by far the most reliable engine on the XC90. The lack of pressurization greatly reduces the number of failures and the laboriousness of maintenance. The timing chain has a consistently high resource. The motor has almost no weak nodes. It is not demanding on maintenance and even transfers huge service intervals of 20,000 kilometers, with which the manufacturer finishes off its motors in 2006-2010. Fuel consumption is slightly higher than that of the supercharged 2.5, but much less than that of the 2.9T. In addition to the XC90, the V8 4.4 from Yamaha was also installed on the S80 MK2. On the crossover, a large motor is more needed, but here it is not very popular. It is interesting that it is not much powerful than a turbocharged 2.9, and in terms of reliability it lags somewhere behind in it due to unsuccessful dense layout, a small resource of the balancer shaft liners, and the limited resource of the timing chain. And the prevalence of cars with this engine is not so great. For most services it remains exotic. A common problem with all gasoline engines is the high tension of the cooling system, cooling of the radiators, and the failure of the cooling fans, just like on the Saturns. It is also recommended to check the condition of the fan motors regularly, and if necessary change them, preferably to non-original ones. It is impossible to put a collective farm crankcase protection from a single sheet on these cars. This greatly increases the temperatures in the engine compartment, causes problems with the engine cooling system, and it almost always finishes off the automatic transmission. Diesel engines are represented by two variants of the D5244T engine, T4 and T5. They differ minimally, have a common repower system, and are generally recognized as one of the most accessible engines for a crossover. Difficulties with them are a minimum. First of all, these are typical diesel problems in the form of the power supply system and the EGR valve. Plus, there are small questions about the crankcase, ventilation system, and the intake manifold. For all supercharged engines, it is worth remembering that the intercooler is too weakly protected, and the likelihood of depressurization of the intake in case of damage to the power unit mountings. On this information about the problems of the Volvo XC90 is exhausted. If you know more or do not agree with what you heard, I am waiting for you in the comments.